Hey guys, it's me, Amanda, again for our live baking show number 2. Thank you, Chris, for holding the camera and doing the intro music today, and I appreciate that. Sounded good. Today we're going to be doing a chocolate fudge bundt cake. This is a recipe from King Arthur Flour. You could probably go to their website and find the recipe, but I'll also post it. You'll see that I have all my ingredient lists and my directions, because unlike the brownies that I know in my head and can do in my sleep, this I've made just a few times, but I feel comfortable enough to show you guys how to do it, and I thought it'd just be fun to do a cake. Bundt cakes are very easy and they're very good. What we're going to do first, because I have to make a part of this that has to cool, so we're going to do the first part in a saucepan that's going to go on the stove. And what we're doing, this is 1 cup of water. Now, the recipe truly calls for 1 cup of coffee. I hate coffee with a passion. And although coffee does bring out chocolate flavor, and it does, I still can always taste the coffee, so I don't use it. I've always learned, oh, it just brings out the flavor, you never taste it. No, I taste it. So I never use it. So you can substitute water, you can use a stout beer, which I think would be like a Guinness. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know.
Oh, okay. So in this recipe, we're using 1 cup of water, not cold, not hot, just straight out of your faucet is fine. We have a filtered water that we use. Then we're going to be doing, this is 16 tablespoons, which is 2 sticks of unsalted butter. If we remember from last week, we always use unsalted butter when we're baking because we don't want to increase the salt flavor in our recipes. So let's put this in our saucepan. And then the last part of this is going to be 3/4 of a cup of cocoa powder. All right, and so now we're going to go to the stove. And you want this just on a low heat, not real high. What we're looking for is we want the butter to melt. And so it shouldn't take too long. And why we're doing this first is because it needs to sit for about 10 minutes to cool. So we want to get this going before we do everything else, because then we don't want to start combining all of our ingredients at the same time. So we're just giving this a little stir. In the meantime, I can say that we have our oven that's been preheated to 350, and you'll want to put your oven rack in the middle of your oven. And so we're just kind of moving this around. You can see it's already melting because the chocolate and the water are mixing well. The butter is starting to melt. And a little tip is, you may have noticed that I had cut the, well, I did cut it, but it's giving me problems now. I had cut up the butter into chunks instead of just throwing 2 solid sticks of butter in here. That will help it start to melt faster. Even if you, like if you're doing a recipe that calls for melted butter and you're gonna put it in the microwave, like how we had our brownies last week, if you cut up your sticks of butter, it's gonna melt faster. So that's something you always wanna keep in mind. So we're just stirring this around.
Is this room temperature butter?
No, this was actually pretty cold. Ideally, you want to have room temperature butter. I was running a little bit behind today, so my butter wasn't really cold, but it wasn't as room temperature as I would have liked. That's a good question, because if you did have room temperature, this would be melted already and you wouldn't be standing here watching me stir. And if this was a real cooking show, I would have had one already melted to the side. But seeing as we're in a quarantine environment and I can't make 2 cakes for people that I'm, for Chris to take to work and for me to take to work, I don't want to make all this extra food and have it for no one to eat. One day we'll get back to that when we're all normal. Please, as we're going along today, if you think of any questions that aren't even related to this item that we're making today, please ask them as we're going along. I hope I can answer your questions as best as possible. I by no means am like Ina Garten or Martha Stewart, but I've been doing this a long time, so hopefully I can help you. So we're almost there. Hope everyone is having a good day today. It's a little chilly. I stood outside the H-E-B this morning before it opened. I try to get there when it opens at 8 because I find that's when they have everything stocked really well. And got in and out of there pretty well. If you guys haven't gone to the store, everything is going pretty good there. They keep everyone distanced pretty well. Wear your mask, wash your hands, bring your hand sanitizer, you'll be set. Okay, so even though we see a little bit of chunks in there, I'm turning off the heat and we're going to take this off the heat to let it sit over here and that will melt as it's in the pot. And I'm going to grab just a pot holder there and bring my spoon back over here. Okay, so before I get to the other ingredients, I wanted to talk about different Bundt pans that you can use for this recipe. So this right here is a traditional Bundt pan. You can find these at your grocery store. You can get them at Target. They're very inexpensive. It's like $10. And this is the usual one that you've seen for years and years. So that's a regular one. I've also have these mini Bundt pans, which are very cute. And so if you were doing a recipe like this, I would say you would need 2 pans of these, maybe even 3. I don't know. But this is also a fun size. When I do like desserts for orders and that, I'm usually this kind of size or the next size. Like this, because isn't this so cute? I love this pan. I got this pan recently and I love it. I love it. It's so cute. In this, I have a couple of these pans, but for a recipe like this, you could probably use 4 pans for the amount of batter that you're gonna have to fill all of these. But what you want to do anytime you're making a Bundt cake, is you need to grease and flour very, very well. If we remember last week, I said I hate greasing and flouring, but in this case, you have to do it. It's crucial so that it actually comes out of the pan. So I'm going to set these aside.
What's my favorite of your One Sweet Bites? What do I enjoy the best is one question.
You as Chris?
Me as Chris.
Well, you as Chris should answer.
The brownies are always pretty good. I kept eating them all week, so.
Yeah.
So.
We did have them all week. I make a peanut butter brownie bite.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Yeah. People really like that.
Okay.
So, today's Bundt pan, as you can see, I'm going to lift it this way so you can see the detail in it. It's pretty fancy. I love this pan. When I saw that they started making it and selling it, I said I had to have this pan because it's fantastic. So, and as you can see, I have it sitting on just a really grubby towel because it's going to get messy. And I've gone ahead and done almost the entire pan of greasing and flouring. So what you want to do first, anytime you have to grease and flour something, is you're going to take melted or almost melted butter. So this is sat for just a couple more minutes, so it got kind of thick again, but that's okay. You're just going to put a little bit on a brush. Is ideal if you have a brush. Again, these are at your grocery store now. All this stuff is at your grocery store. what we want to do, now it's this section here that I didn't do yet, and I can see that the cocoa powder from before got in here, but I'm going to just double it over, and you're going to go into the crevices. It's very, very important. This pan, as you can see, is very deep. And the crevasses, I'll say, are very defined. So if I don't grease and flour this pan very well, you know what's going to happen when I flip it? It's going to get stuck. And we don't want that to happen. So I'm greasing really well. And you see I'm going up on the sides in these sections. Really getting in, because when it sticks, this is where it's going to stick, is in these little crevices of this pan.
Julie already likes the way it looks. She said it looks good right now. She might just lick the Bundt pan.
You might just lick the Bundt pan. I don't know. Cocoa powder doesn't taste too good. You might not. But I'm glad you said that, though, because that means I have it covered really well. And that's what's important. So you can see, and kind of helps that I have the cocoa powder and the butter, because you can see where it's all going up the sides. And I'm going to go over this one too, because there's some spots. Now, because we're working on a chocolate cake today, is why we're using cocoa powder over the butter. If you were using like a vanilla cake, in like just a regular cake, you're going to use white regular flour. But if you're doing chocolate cake, use cocoa powder. If it's a white kind of cake, use flour. Because when you flip it, you don't want to have white flour on top of your chocolate cake. Just a little tip. So now what I'm doing, now you can just take like a spoonful of cocoa powder and just dump it, and then you have to shake it a lot. I find that if I put it in a little tiny sieve and I just kind of tap it, and here I'm tapping, and it's getting this one side really good.
Tappa, tappa, tappa.
Tappa, tappa, tappa. Simpsons fans should recognize that. I'm going to lean it up, and I'm going on the sides. And this isn't the easiest thing, I will say, with a pan like this. It's a process. But the better coverage you have, the more likely your cake will come out. Now, you see here, I have some areas that I'm a little concerned about because I can see the pan. I don't like that. You don't want to be able to see the pan. So it's better to cover it just a little bit more instead of possibly not having that covered and then it sticks. And I'm going to just flip this over so that some of this taps out. You can do this ideally over the sink. Just give it a tap like this. And it's going to be all over the place. But it's what you kind of have to do. You see how much came off. And now you see this is still kind of wet. So I'm going to do another coating. Just to be careful. I'm going to flip it one more time. Tap. Okay. So I'm going to leave this. I feel like that's good. Cover that over there. Wipe my hands. Okay. And so I think that we've had 10 minutes so that our chocolate mixture from the beginning could cool. I'm going to give it a little stir. And we see that our butter is melted. We don't see any more of those chunks. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris. I can't see that far. You see any chunks?
No.
No chunks? Okay. You're a little silent there. I didn't know.
I fell asleep.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad I'm entertaining. Okay. So now, and you'll see we have our KitchenAid out today. You could possibly do this and stir it all by hand if you wanted to. I like using the KitchenAid. I'm just using my paddle attachment today. It gets it more thoroughly mixed. You could also use a handheld mixer, like old school. I have an old school. I prefer this. So what I'm doing in here, which, because I'm going to be mixing it on my stand mixer, instead of having all the little bowls of everything, I just put all the next ingredients in my bowl that I'm going to be mixing it all in, because why make more dishes? So in here, we have 2 cups of sugar, 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, which is 1/4 and 1/2, just in case somebody doesn't know, because not everybody does those measurements, so they don't know. So 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, we have 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and then we have 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And so you'll see I have everything mixed in here, and what I'm doing is just taking a whisk and mixing it all so it's very thoroughly mixed. And I'm doing this to help get any lumps out. You could put this through a strainer if you want, but since you have it all in a bowl, again, you know, a little less dishes. So we see that that got thoroughly mixed. Okay, so now we're gonna go, I'm kind of doing this backwards like a real TV thing, so I hope I do it all right. So what we're gonna do is pour in our chocolate mixture. And I'm gonna stop for just a sec while I'm gonna lock it. And I'm gonna just put it on low. And then I'm gonna pour the rest in. I got these new pans, and man, are they heavy. Alright, I'm going to check my directions here because I follow directions all the time. Pour cold. Okay. Looking for my scraper. Okay. So now I'm going to stop it. See, there's chunks. And we want to scrape down our bowl. That's always very important because everything gets stuck. And we want to always scrape your attachment because there's always stuff stuck to it. All right. Doesn't have to be perfect, but, and when you are using a KitchenAid bowl, and people who have used these probably understand this already, but go all the way to the bottom. You see, like, if you go like this, because in the bottom of a KitchenAid bowl is a little pit, and if you don't do that, you're going to get little clumps down there. All right. So that's really thoroughly mixed. I'm going to just put it down and do one little mix. And that's, so I'm going to leave that.
It's unlocked right now.
Okay, thank you. All right. So in our separate bowl, here we have 2 eggs. And I wanted to mention something about eggs that I forgot to mention during the brownies. So it's very important when you're baking that everything is the same temperature. And so yes, of course, flour and sugar and any kind of dry ingredient is going to be just room temperature. But so it's also important that your butter and your eggs are. Now, in this case, I melted butter, so that's a little different. But now I have eggs that are going to be going into this batter, and so we don't want these super cold because this still has a little heat. And again, with the brownies from last week, if you're adding any kind of egg into something hot, you can potentially scramble it. But it's always best to have room temperature. I will, if I'm making something during the week, I will take my eggs and butter out at noon, and then I bake at 4 o'clock. It's fine that it sits out. You can even take it out the night before. I find that sometimes the butter gets a little too soft then. So ideally, like a 4-hour is perfect. But that's really important, is to always have your eggs, any kind of cold items, unless the recipe specifically says it should be cold. But any kind of batter, you want your ingredients to be room temperature. And so we have our 2 eggs, and I will let you notice that These are pasture-raised eggs that I get at the supermarket. Look at those yolks. Aren't they beautiful? Look at that color. If you compare sometime, and you'll be amazed that these little chickens that hatched these eggs were eating some good bugs. Anyway, so I got 2 eggs. This is a 1/2 cup of sour cream. I have light sour cream. You can use full fat sour cream. For this recipe, you can also use yogurt. I chose to go with the sour cream. We're just gonna put that in there.
Julie appreciated the temperature, eggs, butter. She was not aware.
Oh, well, good. Thank you. I'm glad. I'm trying to think of things that people, like everyday bakers, don't think of. I happen to bake a lot, so I just know these things from in school. And it's just kind of like with the salt thing. People didn't realize that if you're using salted butter and then you're adding salt, you're doubling your salt. And so that can affect the flavor. So it's all these little things. So I added 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. And so now we're just going to mix this together. Not whip, but mix it together. And what I'm trying to do is just make sure this is thoroughly incorporated. I don't want it chunky. That looks pretty good. Just kind of giving it a good mix there. I don't want the chunks. Because what the chunks will be from are the sour cream. Alright. So now we're going to come back to our batter. You said that's... I'm just reading the directions, so I'm making sure I'm doing things correctly. So at this point, I'm mixing my egg mixture into the chocolate batter, stirring until thoroughly combined. So I'm going to pour this in. It's kind of weird doing things from this angle. All right. Gonna lock it. And we're just gonna let it stir.
Could you substitute a vegan version? It'd be tough with eggs.
Yeah, it's always tough with eggs. And unfortunately, I don't do enough vegan baking to know what you substitute eggs for. I don't know. I'm sorry that I don't. I'm sure there is a way. You can make anything vegan nowadays. So if you're somebody who bakes vegan and you know what you use instead of eggs, and then butter. I guess butter you use in oil. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You don't have to know everything.
Okay, so we see at this point, there's still some, so I'm just going to give it a good stir.
We got a request for lemon bars next week, please.
I'm guessing that's from Tracy.
No, it's from Mikey.
Ah, another lemon.
Mikey likes lemons.
My boss Tracy loves lemon.
Well, now you know what I'll be eating next week. Lemon bars.
I may, instead of doing lemon bars, I have this, I think it's like a lemon crackle cookie. I may do that instead. Lemon bars are kind of like, I don't know. Anyway. Okay. So now our batter is ready, and so now we're going to pour it into our pan. And so just kind of, if you have a bowl like this, it's great because there's a handle. If you don't, and you're a little afraid, let me grab something real quick. If you don't have a bowl with a handle, you can use a measuring cup. And you can just, and you're just going to pour it in. Like so. So then you would continue to do that. Since I have the handle, I'm going to use my handle. Sorry. Okay. I'll grab this.
There's egg substitute, 1 tablespoon flax to 3 tablespoons water, I believe is what she says.
Interesting. Flax. And watch as you're pouring in. I'm trying to keep an eye that I don't go in the hole.
Tracy is a lemon lover.
She is. I know. I know she is.
And Jenny says raspberry and lemon. She's a little more particular. She's
Is
a
that
fancy
a surprise?
girl.
She's Bailey, right? You're
Yeah,
talking about
she's
Jenny
Bailey.
Bailey?
Yes, Jenny Bailey.
What shocker, we're all very particular. Not sure who we got that from, but anyway, okay. So we have our batter. Now, we're baking the cake for 50 to 55 minutes, long time. If you have a dark coated pan, which would be like your original pan, the old-fashioned Bundt pan, you start to check at 40 minutes. I'm also going to start to check at 40 minutes, just because. What I'm going to be looking for is I'm going to take a long skewer, and I'll show you a skewer. I'm sorry I don't have this out, and it's in the wrong drawer. Sorry. They're in here. At least my drawers are clean. So when it's time for me to check, I have these long skewers. Again, you can get them at the grocery store because you use them for like doing shish kebabs and stuff. But they're great for large cakes like this. I'm going to go right along this area here. I'm not going to be doing the live footage for you when I do this part. That's why I'm showing you now. So you're going to come along this area here. And why this area here is because that's where it's going to be the deepest part of the cake. And so that's where you want to see how much is sticking. And you're looking for that it's not sticking anymore. This is a cake, and so you want it to be clean. Okay? And so now we're going to be putting it in the oven. It's heavy. Watch as you put it in the oven because there is a hole, so you want to make sure you have a good grasp of it or else you'll make a big old mess. My oven isn't as clean as my drawers. All right. And we're putting it directly on our rack, right in the center. And again, I'm going to start testing at 40 minutes. So when we come back in my second live for today, we are going to do the reveal and hope that it comes out okay. You can make cakes for your entire life and you still will always be worried that it comes out okay. I guarantee you that, because you just don't know. And so we'll be doing the reveal, and we're also going to make ganache, because that's what's going to be the topping of this cake today. And for those who follow my One Sweet Bite page, everything's better with ganache, is what I say. If I had a bakery, I would make t-shirts that said that, because ganache is amazing. And it's so easy. It's beautiful, it's glossy, it's shiny, and it looks like it would be hard. No, you'll be amazed. So anyway, we'll see you in about an hour or so, and we'll see you then. Thank you for watching. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.